handles men's and women's roles. So I wasn't really expecting to get people who I would consider to be on the ideological right to then take issue with it. And my initial reaction, I think, was just fear, because um, I had put so much work into this with in mind these women that I wanted to help, and I was really afraid that this narrative about what I had said would predominate the discussion to the point that no one would give the content a chance, which was like just so much worse to me than than people like digging into the content and then having pushback on it. So anyway, I at first felt really scared that would happen, and I wasn't sure what to do about it. But then a lot of people defended me, and some people kind of walked back their statements, which I really appreciated. And so I think it's fine. Um, I hope the focus can be on the content of the presentation going forward.
Yeah, definitely. And certainly, I mean, when certain conferences, I mean, as of someone who presents at different scientific conferences, I mean, sometimes I mean, let's be honest, a scientific conference, we go to it because it's at a nice location. We slap our stats together and throw up some slides, and we kind of just, it's not that serious. The sessions aren't packed, but this is like the FAIR Mormon conference. It's like the big event of the year. To put that much time and attention to it, and then for it to kind of again, and this is members of the church and not necessarily critics of the church, although, well, we'll get into that a bit later, but this is members of the church kind of like giving us this backlash. What I think that for sure that was a shock to everyone. I don't, so I'm sorry that happened, but I can imagine that did not feel pleasant at all. And again, people's reputations are sort of on the line, especially as they claim to defend the faith in the manner that you did. For people to, I don't know, I don't want to say deliberately, but almost deliberately, unintentionally, maybe misunderstand. I don't know. I want to hear from the rest of the panel about kind of what's going on, and we'll dive deeper into kind of like into what's going on, and specifically the Aaron Sharinian stuff. Um, Tarik, I wanted to hear your take, because you kind of had an extra spicy take on all this that you sent me, and I'm like, oh, this is going to be good. People are going to, I don't know if they'll love it. We'll let them decide, but go ahead, man.
Okay, first and foremost, before I get to that, before you go online and talk about something, I was noticing this in the screenshot you put up. Maybe you should read and watch the thing before you comment. Just a thought. Because because Maegan obviously answered all those concerns in the actual video. So if you just watch the thing before you commented, there you go. You don't have to be a keyboard warrior or whatever. But I think, like, to your bigger point, because you're asking about, like, why weren't there as many influencers at the conference as there were last year's, like, that was kind of one of your bigger points, right?
Yes.
Okay, well, what I was thinking in the take I sent you was, well, look, FAIR is an apologetics organization. Apologetics is a branch of theology, and theology and philosophy are very, very small circles. And influencers typically are not philosophers, and they don't know anything about philosophy or theology. So, of course, they're not. So it doesn't make any sense for them to be at those type of conferences. It's a certain market of people that do that. They're engaging with a certain set of ideas, a certain conceptual framework, and things like that. So it's a good thing that FAIR does things the way they do, that they have people who engage in that area. It's not about getting popular or just talking about your pet issues. It's about certain areas that come up. So that's why there weren't as many influencers. Did you want me to comment on the Aaron part too, or?
No, I think we'll get
Because
to that in a
I
minute.
presented at FAIR, so I had a thought about just the Q&A point as soon as I saw that. But We can.
Yeah, we'll come back to that. I want to get Zach's take, because you also were presenting at FAIR, and you were kind of on that side of what was going on, and so I want to hear, what kind of what your experience was with all that.
Well, I remember showing up on the Wednesday evening when he was talking. I remember watching the presentation and thinking it was really good. And there was a part of me that was suspecting that a question like the one that was asked of him would be asked at that event, especially because I saw a couple of individuals at the FAIR conference that led me to wonder, they probably might ask a question about that. And so I remember I remember hearing that question being asked and then listening to Aaron's response and me liking the response, but then also feeling like a pin in my stomach, saying, I'm a little bit concerned about the way that might be interpreted. Because in my mind, I understood what Aaron was saying. I understood that Aaron was supportive of the brethren, but at the same time wanted to be able to address like how he was dealing with specific concerns about accusations levied about him and his testimony, whatever the case may be. I think he really tried to walk a fine line of answering the question that Scott, or questions, as we'll probably see, asked of him. But I suppose that in the internet sphere, I don't use X all that often, so that's one more thing that makes me the odd man out. Besides the fact that most of you guys, I think, have degrees, I don't. That said, I don't know. I just struggle with kind of this whole infighting thing. It bothers me a little bit.
No, thank you for that. And I think that's a perfect segue to kind of what Ben was talking about on Facebook. Ben, can you kind of give us what was your take during all this?
Yeah, so I kind of had two takes. One was Twitter's upset. It's going to be something stupid. Turns out I was right. This is like, so I want to start with this. As soon as people started critiquing Maegan Kohler for being too feminist and too progressive and too woke, I was like, oh, this is going to be a good one. Like, this is going to be hilarious. And it was. Like, people who had not seen the presentation, who had not even read the Deseret News review of the presentation, just started getting mad and in their feelings based on one slide that they did not understand correctly. Twitter makes us dumber. I am not saying people on Twitter are dumb. I'm saying that take a smart person, put them on Twitter, and you'll watch their IQ drop in real time. This is bad for us. We should avoid it. And by the way, the other social medias have their own problems. So the first thing I want to say is, like, when you use it wisely and recognize what it does to you. Makes you want to argue over dumb stuff, and that's just not super helpful. The second thing that I want to say, though, is after that piece, people started really ragging on Aaron Sherinian, and it was the people that I expected would. They had already had this out a year ago when he was hired, and they were really upset that somebody who had pride flags and some advocacy in his background could be hired by the brethren. And to me, that's crazy. I was like, that's totally fine. Like, I know a lot of people who have different views than me, and they're good disciples, and it's just not a big deal. By the way, I feel like part of the reason why I needed to stand up and say something is because I am very orthodox on the family. Right? Like, I feel very, very comfortable saying that piece. And so if somebody else calls them out, then it's going to be, you're just a wacko, progressive, woke, liberal, crazy person. It's like, but I'm not those things. And so I can say this. You all took it way too far. If you didn't like how Aaron Sherinian asked the question, let's stipulate for a moment that Aaron messed up and caused a problem. The reaction by LDX was far worse than anything that was supposedly done by Aaron Sherinian. The level of distracting from an awesome conference, the way that we shifted the narrative from all of the good that the church is doing. For everybody that has told me, Aaron Sherinian did an amazing job in his actual presentation. And we have now taken that and diluted it because we want to have a different conversation. Yeah, that's weird. And to Tarik's point, these are primarily influencers who are like, no, but I deserve to have my questions answered. Now, the second thing that actually really got my goat was, this just wasn't the question that he was asked, right? If you believe in conviction on demand, which I have ethical questions about, like, I'm not sure, outside of a general authority, I'm not really sure that I should be like, testimony, go. I need to hear it, and I need to judge it, and I need to feel like it's good enough. That feels weird to me. But to have a church employee, like I am a church employee, to have somebody be like, I'm judging your social media, and I don't think you're orthodox enough, that's crossing a line that I feel really weird about. Let's set all of that aside. He was asked, how do you deal with the flack? How do you deal with people mistreating you? And he answered that, I think, wonderfully. He was like, well, There are people who I sustain who sustain me. He's probably talking about very senior leaders of the church, including apostles. He talked about be still and know that I am God. He talked about don't take it personally, but take it personally because it's personal for them. I thought it was a lovely response. But because people wanted to hold his feet to the fire and make it an accountability moment on the family proclamation, and they didn't get that, they got really upset. And I just take issue with that. So I recorded a video. It's about 15, 20, no, it's 25 minutes long. I was trying to make it 15 minutes long. It was a 25-minute video where I was like, hey, this is weird. We look weird right now. And instead of talking about all the good things that happen at FAIR, we're talking about manufactured controversies that just didn't need to happen. So that's my very short version of my perspective on what happened.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you for everyone for sharing that. I wanted to kind of share kind of my initial thoughts on what had happened, because what I had noticed was that FAIR used to be, I mean, it still in large part is, but you know, in years prior, it was very, very academic, and people were talking about defending the church in kind of at a very high level. People would submit abstracts. You know, a lot of my BYU professors would speak there, and people who would be publishing in different journals would also speak there, and this includes both academic and apologetic type journals. And then, like you said, Tarik, in I think it was last year, it kind of shifted a bit more towards influencers, and this year there were a few influencers. But and to me, the word influencer, I study psychology, so for me, social influence is a big topic that I think about often, especially in things like sales, but also just from an evolutionary perspective. Some people would argue that a human need is social influence, meaning, you know, we need people to cooperate with us or to do things for us or be altruistic towards us, or even to get people to do what we want them to do. So the prime example would be like a baby cries, the mother is alarmed, she instantly attends to the baby, and that helps increase its survival. In other grander contexts, societies have to align themselves to a leader. The society has to sort of cooperate at a large scale, and if the leader loses his or hers social influence, that they're less likely to thrive on a grand scale and things like that. But what I noticed was, you know, not only were there influencers on the docket this year, there was a certain kind of influencer on the docket at FAIR, and it wasn't the Twitter people. It wasn't like the people who are kind of like leading the meme war or getting people to dogpile on one another. It was like people. I mean, Maegan, you're on Twitter and you have a fair amount of followers, but certainly not to dog on you, but you don't have like the most amount of followers.
I don't put a ton of effort into it, so I'm not sad.
Yeah, and
you're saying that it's fine
for sure. And people like Jasmine Rapley, for example, she used to be, you know, the Scripture Central Twitter got a lot of traction, but she mostly doesn't hang out there. She's on TikTok and Instagram, and other people like Brad Whitbeck and Carden from Word Radio, they're on YouTube. So it seems like all these other people are sort of invited to play, but the people on Twitter have been excluded. And so their social influence has been seriously undermined. And one of the criticisms that people have given towards me and my take is they say, well, Alejandro, the speakers at FAIR aren't exactly vetted by the church, or they weren't chosen by church officials. And I can concede that. But I also, the idea that there is zero overlap between people who publish for FAIR and for the Interpreter and at BYU Studies, and you know, there's a large overlap between those people, and so I would argue that we can infer, maybe not deductively, but certainly with a great degree of probability, that a lot of the people who are speaking at FAIR are speaking there because FAIR believes that they are aligned with the mission of the church. And to have the church send its PR people there and other representatives, they would only do that, in my opinion, if they felt that the conference at large was aligned with the mission of the church. And so to me, I see a divide, a misalignment between what's happening on Twitter. I believe that for whatever reason, the online culture on Twitter and the influencers on Twitter are seriously misaligned with the mission of the church and the mission of FAIR, so much so that they, for some reason, misframe all the content being put out by FAIR, and they see, and so to my next point, this reaction is an attempt to justify their influence. People like some YouTubers would say, "Well, let's get Aaron onto my show. I can talk to him and I can have sway with him." It's like, whoa, Mr. Hansen, I don't think you have the skill set, the authority, or in any way represent the church, or anyone, or the broader population of Latter-day Saints for you to do that. I don't know why you would even suggest that. So in my opinion, this is kind of like people jiving for social influence and trying to justify that using their online clout and stuff like that.
Can I jump in on that real quick?
Yeah.
So I want to say three things on this, and I'll try to keep it brief, because what I hear you saying is if they were representatives that the church liked, they would get invitations to FAIR. And I want to stipulate, I don't know anything about how FAIR runs. From what I understand, it's run by like two people who are both volunteers, and then there's somebody who sells books in the bookshop. Like, this is not a high-powered, high-finance kind of a thing. And if anybody wants to correct me on that, please feel free. I think we need influencers. I think we need Twitter influencers. I think we need people who make mistakes. I don't have a problem with any of those things. I'm not sure we can infer that the church doesn't trust the people who spoke out afterwards. And I also want to resist the idea that they did it to generate some kind of controversy and get clicks or anything like that. I don't think that's what happened. What I think happened is that over the last 10 years, some people have become so used to pushing back on woke culture infecting the church that now they don't see a difference. I said this to a friend earlier. In fact, I think I said it in my video. Being anti-woke isn't the goal. That's not the same as discipleship, right? I absolutely believe that there were problems with woke ideologies, if you want to call them that, right? If you want to call it the social justice movement. The progressivism of the last 10 years in the culture has had a lot of problems. There's also been a couple of good things I would love to talk about more at length. My issue is that for those people who for the last 10 years have been like, I am on the side of the church, this is what I believe. Now all of a sudden they're going, maybe I don't like this. The church is not where I am. The church must be wrong, right? Now, I want to emphasize, most of the people who are doing this are not directly calling out the church, but this is a very sticky moment where they're having to go, that I have used as a proxy beliefs about the family as the whole sum and substance of orthodoxy, and that doesn't work anymore, right? I think BYU is a part of this, right? We are used to worrying about people's orthodoxy, and now the church is not in that place, and I think the culture has moved, and I think that's an important part of the puzzle. The two people that I called out very deliberately because I consider them friends, and I say that genuinely. I don't think they liked it very much, but like, I'm trying to keep relationships. I'm also trying to say like, hey, the pendulum can swing too far. Right? It was bad when it was over here, and now it's going, it can go bad on the other direction. Let's ease up a little bit. I think you got this one wrong. And I'm pretty confident in what I said. I feel like that was the right call. But that's how I see it. I see it as a pendulum swing.
Can I say something really quick?
Yes.
So I think your observations about the tone of FAIR, I think you're right in the sense that my sense of FAIR is that it's striving to be scholarly and nerdy in the best kinds of ways, but it also wants to maintain there's still a ministerial approach there. It's not devotional. The content is not devotional, but it is compatible with ministering to people who are struggling with different aspects of the church. And so like when I gave my presentation, I got criticized a lot on social media for using the language of feminism, and that's very intentional. I've studied a ton of second wave feminism, and I'm using I was trying to dig into those assumptions because I'm trying to change the discussion at the level of the assumptions. And so I'm using those words in part because those who are criticizing the church from a feminist point of view will understand those terms. And I'm not simply trying to swat back at critics. I'm trying to answer them and provide a different framework for women who actually struggle with this. And so what I think there can be is that there's different audiences. And I think when you get really honed in on certain issues, you know, if it's the family proclamation or, you know, where people stand on that, I think you can kind of forget about what the entire audience looks like, what how different people are perceiving these messages based on a whole bunch of factors, and what the best way is of reaching them. And so, like, the criticism that I'm using feminist language, I'm like, I know, you know, because I'm not really trying to reach people that are already critical of feminism. So I you know I mean, I don't know why people find that offensive, but if they do, I'm sorry, but I'm trying to reach people who use these terms. And I think, like, when I look at what happened with Aaron Sherinian, I think it is like another example of he was trying to answer, well, first of all, it was a very complicated question. And to be honest, when I first heard him, if I hadn't had the context of people being upset about him not talking about the family proclamation, I wouldn't have even thought that he didn't answer the question correctly. You know, in other words, I think he answered it the way that somebody who isn't honed in on the symbolic value of the family proclamation would answer that question. And I think there are a lot of members of the church who would have who wouldn't have seen anything suspicious about what he did. I think some of that suspicion just comes from these anxieties that have been built up, because we are using this as a symbol, because we're using this as a marker of a stand-in for whether or not somebody is on the right side of the issues. And so that plays like a huge oversized role in your mind, when to most members of the church, I mean, we're a global church, you know. He's speaking to people that come from very traditional backgrounds as well as liberal backgrounds. And so they're not going to hone in on that question the way that, I don't know. So anyway, yeah.
No, I love it. And I wanted to point out, thank you for your response. I think what you've said, especially on the point about maybe FAIR is more ministerial, but not so devotional. I think I think there might be panelists that might disagree with that. So, for example, Tarik, you were saying apologetics is for the apologists and for the theologians and for the academics. Some people would say, well, isn't that elitist? We need messages for lay people too. But on the other hand, maybe it's not so devotional that it's, I mean, this isn't a feel good testimony meeting either. So what, where do we draw the line, or should there a line be drawn in the first place? But I feel like maybe your two lines of thought might be in a bit of tension here.
Are you talking about Maegan and I?
Yes.
Okay. Well, first of all, I'm an Aristotelian, so I have no problem saying I'm also an elitist. That's just no problem there.
Why did I invite you again? No, I'm just kidding.
Yes. So, but to your point about apologetics being, I wasn't saying what should or shouldn't be. I'm just saying historically what apologetics is. It's a branch of theology. Now within the LDS Church, it's a little different, since you don't do theology as a discipline the way, like, say, the Catholic Church does. You don't have like departments of theology or things like that. So apologetics is a bit broader in that sense. So you can have different, like the more ministerial things that Maegan was talking about. So that's fine. I don't think you have to exclude that. I just think that fundamentally that's what apologetics is. Apologetics is justifying why you believe what you believe, coming from Plato's Apology, of course. So I don't know,
I
Megan,
don't.
do you disagree with that, or
No, not at all. Not at all. And I do want to say too, like I don't think that you have to have one or the other. Like for and like in my presentation, I try to be ministerial in tone, but the substance of the presentation included a lot of social science, statistics, philosophy, um, doctrinal discussion, and so I think you can do all of that in a way that is aimed at edifying and helping people rather than on just being, it's defending without being defensive, if that makes sense.
I have something to add on to that specifically. In my mind, the realm of apologetics is meant to, it's like with most other branches of philosophy, they have a specific set of questions with a specific set of problems they want to solve. And I view the problems that FAIR is trying to solve is they want to be able to have the people who not necessarily just have questions, but the kind of people who consistently have questions, the people who consistently have a desire to look at this more closely and see how that reconciles or aligns with faith. And I look at what FAIR is doing, and I feel that FAIR is trying to reach that audience specifically. And they invited speakers accordingly to be able to answer questions that people typically have when they talk about Latter-day Saint theology or history. And so that's one of the reasons that I appreciate it, because I think that they do an effective job at being able to communicate that information and provide those resources for people. And what's unfortunate is when they try to do that and either it doesn't get to the end of the aisle, it's, not quite able to be translated correctly for like the modern layperson who's trying to like listen to this sort of thing, or in this instance where people look at these kinds of efforts of really good people and they're trying to be, they end up being offenders for a word, where they're looking for things to kind of nitpick at. And I mean, if you don't want to engage with FAIR's materially, then you don't have to engage with FAIR's material. But honestly, I don't see a problem with what FAIR was trying to do by inviting Aaron Sherinian, and I don't necessarily see a problem with him providing the answer that he did, because he was trying to solve the problem of dissonance that people may have felt, even if they didn't understand what he was trying to say.
can I say one thing about Aaron, because I seem to be the one person who didn't comment on him.
Go ahead.
Okay. When you're judging someone's remarks, I think it's best to really go with their prepared remarks on judging, because remember, when you're doing, you take a lot of time preparing those statements, and then your statements to the questions are just off the cuff. That you're just first thing that comes into your mind. You'll probably watch that and say, "Dang it, I wish I'd said this, not this," but you don't have as much time. So the fact that the LDSX group got really, really mad about what he said off the cuff kind of shows you like you were waiting for something where you knew the person could maybe say something you wanted them to say that you could jump on, rather than going to their prepared remarks, which don't seem to have caused an issue as far as I could see, but maybe someone can correct me on that.
I think that's so true, Tarik. And like, I, for instance, don't consider myself a very good public speaker. And I was very nervous, and I can hardly even remember what I said in the portion, in the Q&A portion. I'm sure that when I rewatch it, I will cringe inside, because I was nervous, and it's so hard to do that in real time.
It definitely is. Definitely hard to do that in real time, and yeah, it is hard to anticipate not only every question, but how different audiences would perceive it. People who are, I would say, closer to FAIR. When I would write things on Facebook regarding this, people would thank me, and they would say, "Yeah, I agree with most of this. Maybe a few points I don't, but for the most part, Aaron Sherinian is a rock solid member of the faith. Um, he's been doing his job well. It seems to be it seems to be unfair to take his comments and interpret them in that manner. And so, yeah, it's hard to be given a question off the cuff and then answer it in a way in which no one will misinterpret you. That seems like a really tall order. But for me, the thing that kind of rubs me the wrong way about why this was all misinterpreted is kind of how the family proclamation is being used. So on the one hand, the family proclamation is like, very much part of our religion, very much part of our set of beliefs. It's not necessarily a temple recommend question yet. It might be one day, who knows. But what I see happening is that people are using it as a litmus test, or like a purity test, or even a political litmus test, where it's like every time you talk to an audience, do you have to say, I affirm the proclamation to the faith, and then everyone will raise their hand and say, I affirm it, and then you're off, then you're good. What comes to mind for me is there was a professor a while back at one of the BYUs. He put on his he expressed that he felt that Donald Trump was an unrighteous man, which is not uncontroversial. Like that shouldn't be a contested statement. Like, obviously the man is not a moral leader of any kind. But people were offended. Students then taped the family proclamation to his wall or to his door, and then he, it's his door, so he removed all the stuff people put on his door. But people felt that, oh my gosh, you're rejecting the family proclamation. It's like, whoa. Why should the family proclamation in any way, shape, or form mean that you support Donald Trump? You're misusing the family proclamation by associating it with that person. And so I think people are not only in the name of respecting the family proclamation being extra zealous, but they're also disrespecting it simultaneously by misusing it to use it as a political litmus test.
You mentioned a CES example. Can I comment on that real quick?
Yeah, go ahead.
So I want to start with, like, again, I just read a book by Deseret, and he's controversial in his own right, and I disagree with him on a lot of stuff. But his book is basically about pathological ideologies, right? Ideas that are so bad that they get into us, they infect us, and then they warp us, they change us. And I think there are some good examples of that over the last 10 years. I think the wokeism that a lot of people point to on this is one example. I think there's plenty of other political ideologies that are just as infectious and just as toxic. And the reality is that the gospel of Jesus Christ is independent of both of those things. Now, I want to take this one step further. I think that when we look at why people are in this place, why they're using this as a litmus test, is because this was the culture war issue over the last 10 years. The reason why people are upset over this specific issue is because this is where the center of the arena has been fighting. And that makes sense to me. So here's what I'd like to offer. I love the way that Gad Sadden and Jordan Peterson talk about this. The way that they refer to this is that we all have like an intellectual immune system. And when we have ideas challenged, then that gets its hackles up and we kind of push against it. And that can be a bad thing, but it can also keep us safe from really, really bad ideological beliefs. I think what I am seeing from a lot of people out there right now is that their immune system is so ramped up that when they see anything even related to wokeism, they immediately go from 0 to 60, and they're upset and they're frustrated, and they say, oh, I need clarification. I need to hold them accountable. Ironically, this ends up looking a lot like left-wing activism from 10 years ago, where we're going to start a Twitter mob. We're going to have big campaigns to draw attention to something. We may not call for their ouster or for their firing, but we are going to draw attention to it. We might even do a signature campaign, right? I think that those are not the way that we go. And here's my key point. Somebody by the name of Dallin Oaks asked us to pause the culture wars. This is in 2016. I don't think that he was saying that we abandon principle. I don't think he was saying we don't stand up for the family. But this kind of stuff, this doesn't feel like what I should be doing. In fact, it doesn't feel like it so much that I feel like I need to stand up and say, hey, maybe we need to ease up a little bit. I think that maybe something is off here. And here's my mental, what would you call it? My thought experiment. if somebody doesn't support the family in the way that you want, do you feel exercised? Okay, great. Now, how exercised do you feel if you feel like somebody isn't sufficiently a peacemaker? Is it the same level of activation? Are you the same level of upset and frustrated? I don't have any problem. Like, the family proclamation is a big deal. We have very orthodox beliefs. We have traditional beliefs, and I'm on board with all of that. But my issue is not so much the litmus test as much as we are reducing all of orthodoxy down to beliefs on the family. And we're doing it in kind of not great ways, in ways that push a lot of people away and make people mad. And I don't think that it's also very aligned with the gospel. I think that it's more aligned with like this hardlinerism that feels really, really good. And that feels weird to me. CES as an example, right? I think we've made some moves to make sure that people are on mission. I support that 1,000%. I think that's exactly what we should be doing. And if somebody gets hired outside my department, I don't go around sniffing for clues as to whether they're on mission. They're my colleague. I welcome them. I work with them. I don't worry about it because it's not my jurisdiction. And if I have a real deep concern, maybe I might talk to them, or I might send an email to their department chair saying, hey, I got a weird vibe. There's this thing that I feel. But what I'm not going to do is go on Twitter and be like, this person doesn't believe enough, and I'm going to mount a pressure campaign, or I'm going to draw attention to it, or I just don't feel like that's something that we as Latter-day Saints should be doing. I think there are good ways. I wrote letters about the BYU issue when that was going on. And I said, hey, I think we need to address this. There's some stuff that I'm hearing, and maybe I'm hearing the wrong thing, but it seems like an issue. And I tried to handle it in the best way that I could. There is very, very clear evidence that the senior leadership and the board of CES is moving on that. That's good enough for me. And so as soon as I know that Aaron Sherinian is supported by senior leadership of the church, my questions are over. I don't need to dig into that any more than I already have.
One thing I just wanted to say is that a friend pointed out to me how when we start using aspects of our doctrine as symbolic measurements, or even like as weapons sometimes, then what the cost of doing that is that we're not talking about the substance anymore. So we're not talking about the substance of the family proclamation. And when you use something as a weapon, then you have to be prepared for people to want to swat it away, right? If you're using it to hurt somebody, then they're going to react against it. And so I think that it's not as though getting like having a lot of people going ballistic online about things that other church members say, or that church general authorities say has no effect. It does. The effect is that it completely distracts us from the substance of their comments. And instead we get into these meta discussions about whether or not this person is sufficiently on our side. I think that's a real tragedy because the content of what is being said is rich. It can help people's lives. The family proclamation is when we can incorporate the assumptions of that into our lives, into our research, into our work, really incredible things can happen. But if we're just dealing with it at the level of it being a tribal symbol, none of that can happen. So we lose out.
I wanted to add to your guys' comments, and I was thinking about this in terms of feminism. One of the things that I see, especially in feminist discourse, is not only are so on the one hand, I kind of have to agree that things like science and knowledge and things like that are not only are employed to be accurate, but sometimes they have a cultural tinge to them too. So like our science is culturally stained, or the presuppositions that we have are embedded in the science. And because of that, I believe when feminists hear any kind of claim, not only is it a description of the world, but it's also a type of justification of how the world should be. and so that sort of lends itself to a type of skepticism, but also skepticism might be the right move, especially if you're being oppressed, right? Um, um, what I see happening, kind of to Ben's point, is it's sort of flipped, where the conservatives are now approaching things with a sort of like cynical and skeptical hermeneutic, where is what PR people and people at FAIR saying a description of the church or the church's beliefs, or is it some type of justification for some agenda, right? And even in this conversation, I hope it's not misunderstood that the way that we're talking about the Family Proclamation is somehow a justification for like some sort of liberal leftist um, worldview. We're trying to actually describe the world how it is, and even say certain things shouldn't be used in a certain way. But I do see. So to your point, Ben, this tactic of using like a suspicious hermeneutic and then employing like online dogpiling and woke tactics, for me, people resort to those things. This is my opinion anyway. People resort to those things because they lack social influence. They can't get other people to cooperate with them, so then they have to employ, you know, uh, mobs and pitchforks to get people to change. And then I think the assumption here too is it's a branding thing. People say Twitter is the internet public square. No, it's not. Like, there's nothing about Twitter that is representative of the public discourse or of the broader population. It's just another internet silo that Elon Musk owns, and that we should probably be skeptical of because he's sort of in power, um and so this whole discourse is saying something like we should be it's saying we should be owed certain explanations and justifications because we represent the church, and it doesn't. um and I think the argument that I was putting out there is, yeah, there are first of all, this FAIR conference, its audience is those who might not be aligned with the church. It's with those who maybe are critical of the church, and we have to, in a certain sense, minister to them, help them understand what's going on, for using their vocabulary. um and so for me, I think this reflects just a broad misalignment and also a lack of social influence that's occurring online. And I think that's fueling the response, is people feel, actually, for sure, I mean, people feel there's a loneliness epidemic. People we were doing a literature review on social media use. So people who have a lot of social capital use social media as an information tool. That's where they get their news. They go there for ideas. But people who are low in social capital, they use it to compensate for their lack of friends. And then they might even engage in cyberbullying as a part of that. It was a wild study. I'll link it in the comments eventually. But so what's causing this divide and this rift? I think it is sort of this sort of lack of I mean, at the end of the day, a lack of love and of friendship. But I wanted to hear from other people. I don't want to take the whole time.
I want to hear more from Zach, but I feel a little bit bad. I've got kids that need to go to bed, so I'm probably going to do the thing where I come back and listen to all of Zach's thoughts later. If I can kind of make a quick closing statement, and then I'm going to jet just a few minutes early. I'm not upset at all that influencers get things wrong. I'm not worried about it. Like, that's going to happen. I'm not even, they don't have to believe me when I say that I think they got it wrong. What I do really want to emphasize is that the people who I called out are not people who I think are trying to tear down the kingdom or malign the brethren or go their own way. But I do think that Twitter is dangerous. I think you spoke to this really well, Alejandro, that Twitter makes us want to argue about stuff. It does not foment understanding. It makes us more confused about what people are saying. It's hard to convey emotion in ways that are different from Instagram and Facebook and other things. And I'm not saying that they don't have their own vices. They all have their own vices. But this is why I always try and say, hey, we're both heated. Why don't we call? Why don't we talk on Zoom? Why don't we reach out to each other? I think my frustration was when people doubled down, when people said, nope, this is the right way to see it. It's the only way to see it. And I'm right about this. And I had to push really hard to be like, I don't think Aaron dodged the question. I don't think you heard the question right. People got upset about that. The good news about this is this isn't because people are bad. It's because it's basic human psychology. They're just human beings. All of us go through this. I have been in the position where I misheard a question because I wanted to mishear and not that I wanted to, but my brain interpreted it. This is cognitive science. This happens all the time. This is confabulation. And I don't think it's that hard to cut some people some slack. But I also don't think, like, the one thing that I know about social media is that a little bit of accountability goes the long way. When somebody says something crazy and you say, hey, I think you went a little bit too far, they hate you for it. And it also makes the whole place better. And it says, hey, I care about you, but I care about telling the truth a little bit more. I should say, too, I'm looking at some old threads that I was participating in. There's some people who are currently saying that Russell M. Nelson is a bad leader for the church. They are not the influencers who I took to task. But there are people out there who are saying that. This is absolutely one path to apostasy over the woke stuff. And I just think that's crazy. And so, like, have there been apostasies on the left? Yes. Are there going to be apostasies on the right? There already are. And I think we can be a little bit more mature and just say, I am for the kingdom of God or bust. Like that is where I am aiming to be, whether it's on the left or on the right. Like that's immaterial to me. I want to be squarely in the camp of where the Lord wants to lead us. So you all have been fabulous. I loved all of your points. God bless. Continue on without me, and I'll see y'all next time.
See you, Ben.
Thanks, Ben. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Ben.
One thing I was going to recommend is that you pull up Scott's post on X and then let the people see that. Would that be possible?
Let me see if I can pull that up. You can keep talking while I try to pull that up.
I was going to mention another thing while you were looking at that. They were talking. Yeah, he was talking about basic human psychology. I study psychology at BYU in the moment. You studied psychology. And so one of the things that I thought of was what prompts threat responses. And what came to my mind was the SCARF model. Maybe you've heard of it, maybe not. But it's SCARF is an acronym standing for 5 different things that can prompt threat responses. Anything that threatens status, certainty, autonomy, relatedness, or fairness have a tendency to prompt threat responses in people generally. And on social media, it's very easy to discuss topics and not clarify things in a way that can cause a threat response for one of those things. And I mean, obviously, an underlying concern I understand people have about the Family Proclamation, or even defending the Family Proclamation, is its relevance to society, and at the same time, the certainty as to whether or not it is actually doctrine or not. People have serious concerns about the idea of, okay, we've seen, one of the specific complaints people have about this kind of thing is we've seen other things or teachings change in the church. So why should we expect the Family Proclamation, or like how people view it in the church, to not change over time as well? And I think that's an interesting discussion to have about like the nature of revelation and line upon line stuff. I think that's an important discussion to have. But at the same time, it's very easy to talk about this sort of thing in a way that makes us feel very threatened. And I think what Ben was pointing out was this idea that because of how social media makes it really easy for us to frame our thoughts as sound bites without clarifying things, and in ways that cause threats to us, such as a threat to the certainty about doctrine, or a threat to the relatedness of that doctrine to our lives, or how we want to interact with our peers, then of course there are going to be some serious, there's going to be some conflict there, and there are things that we can do to help resolve that conflict. But just really keeping that in mind as we're doing any kind of engagement generally can make our lives a lot better and a lot easier for us if we're coming at questions with the right perspective, and also at the same time trying not to cause unnecessary threat responses. Sometimes we can't avoid it, but doing our best to engage in ways that make that easier for other people, I think, is helpful.
Awesome. Yeah, I totally agree. And I think that also sort of speaks to what Maegan was saying earlier. Like, you're trying to speak people's language in a certain way where people won't just turn off immediately, So excellent thoughts. Okay, I have Scott Gordon's Twitter pulled up. Is that what you're talking about? His Twitter account?
Yeah, specifically the post that he had, or at least the screenshot of that one comment he had made.
Let's see. Was it this one here? Or
He made like a pretty long post trying to explain.
oh, this one.
Maybe.
No, I don't think it was that one.
If you have a link, for sure throw it up, and I'll send it to me, and I can pull it up.
Yeah, let me work on that for a second.
Sure. Anyway, we'll come back to that. Anyone have anything else they want to add to that, or any other topics? Then we'll come back to the Scott Gordon thing. Okay. I think one of the issues with kind of this whole thing with apologetics, it's tough to. It's one thing to call out critics. It's another thing to call out members. I don't think FAIR will ever have I'm every now and then they go after schismatic groups and things like that are undermining apostasy, but I was talking to Ben earlier. I was saying, well, this whole Aaron Sherinian thing to me kind of sounds like Twitter's version of polygamy denial, where certain people online would say, well, Joseph Smith didn't practice polygamy, Brigham Young lied, and John Taylor lied, and so lied, and Eliza R. Snow lied, et cetera, et cetera. And people like Brian Hales would say, wait a second, if you're going to make this claim, you have to then have evidence to back up all these other claims that are available to us via implication, right? If Joseph Smith didn't practice polygamy, then the only way you can square that is if you have evidence that these people lied and betrayed Joseph Smith, etc. And that's sort of like the hallmark of a conspiracy theory, where you have a claim, there's not very much converging evidence, and then you sort of just roll with it. You accept it wholeheartedly. With the Aaron Sherinian thing, and with your talk, Maegan, it's like, oh, well, if Maegan truly was saying that men are being subservient to women, and that Aaron Sherinian doesn't sustain the brethren or uphold the family proclamation, then that would suggest, all sorts of things. The brethren didn't vet this person very well, that Maegan isn't aligned with the church, that the brethren are either misinformed or undermining the entire organization. And so, as Brian Hales would say, you pick up one end of the stick, but you can't pick up the other end of the stick, and it sort of falls apart. The type of thinking, as far as I can tell, it's the same sort of logic, where all the implications sort of have to be true in order for the original statement to be true. You're assuming that it's true that that Brigham Young lied, and these people so and so lied, and that the brethren are misinformed or undermining the organization. All that has to be true first before you can then say Joseph Smith didn't practice polygamy, and therefore Aaron Sherinian doesn't support the family proclamation. But they have their logic backwards. They're making all these assumptions, and then making more assumptions that lead to more assumptions, and it's just bad reasoning. Okay, I got the screenshot here. Let me pull this up. Give me 1 second. I'm just gonna pull it up right here, and then I'll share my screen. What do you think? Do we need more theological, philosophical training in the church? Should we become like the Catholic Church, or should we continue being a lay ministry?
Is somebody asking that, or you just bring that out of nowhere? Where
I'll check the comments. Let me pull this up here.
We can close on that. I have some thoughts.
Okay, sure. We'll close on that. Let me share this, and then Zach, I'll let you make some comments. Is this where you want it here? Can you see that? I'm just gonna hide my DMs from Ben. Ben, text me later. Zach, can you see that?
Yes,
okay, go ahead.
I can see that clearly.
Oh, I guess I'll read it then. Is that what you wanted? Did you want to highlight a specific part of it?
Honestly, I was hoping that you could read the entire thing. It's not entirely long. Sure. Tell you what, let me read it. Is it okay?
Okay, go ahead.
Okay. So they're responding to a guy named Clint. I have no idea who Clint is. Like I said, I'm not on X. I wasn't familiar with the context of this quote, but I'll go ahead and read it to you. So it says, addressed to Clint, let me try and clear this up a bit. First, my question was not phrased well. I own that. I was looking at 4 or 5 different questions submitted by the audience and trying to combine them into one so that I wouldn't be asking him basically the same question over and over again. And I was trying to do that with 300 people waiting and watching and the spotlight's on. No, I wasn't afraid of asking. Second, his purpose in coming wasn't to answer that question. It was to give a talk, which was very good, by the way. It just provided a time to ask questions. Third, he ultimately said, of course, I support the brethren. His response probably could have been tighter, but he was responding to my less than perfect question. And then we'll jump to this one. Let's try to look.
Sorry, Facebook is being weird. Give me 1 second. Is that the next
Yes,
page?
so
Okay.
let's try to look at a bigger picture. FAIR is one of the only venues where we can bring in church people. The church has their employees busy doing other things, so they don't do talks at conferences, but they trust FAIR, so they let them come speak at FAIR. It means getting permission to take time off work if we can use these opportunities to attack people who are trying to follow the gospel, but we call out their imperfections because of what they say at the FAIR conference. That opportunity goes away. That kind of goes back to what Maegan was talking about earlier. So nobody gets these kinds of speakers ever again. We had 4. It would be a huge loss to all of us and even to you. As it is, I don't know if I will be able to get anyone next year because of this. I will try. It's going to take some work. So if the plan was to out or to criticize or to condemn Brother Sherinian, we have to ask at what cost. We may never be able to have another church employee speaker again, except general authorities at General Conference. Is that worth it?
Just to clarify.
Just to clarify, I'm a strong believer of the family proclamation, and I will gladly shout that from the rooftops, but I understand that some people struggle with it. Life is hard. He said that he took counsel from the brethren, so that is good enough for me. I also know that the church communication people really like working with him, and he works very hard defending the faith. Yes, I have an insider source on that. I hope my explanation helps. I get it. We don't want wolves in sheep's clothing in the church, but this was talked about when he was hired. He was then counseled by the brethren. Now we have to trust them. So can we please stop this? This being, of course, the arguing and the discussion about this online. So I remember reading this or these screenshots of this specific comment and being really impressed with Scott's response on this, because I think he addresses some of the serious concerns he had about people distracting from the conference, but also like how the church is going to interact with FAIR in the future. And I feel like those consequences were kind of glossed over in a lot of the discussion. And I think that a lot of the comments that were made by these people were really, really thought-provoking and interesting and helpful. The one of the other hot button topics that was discussed by some of these people was the lawyer from Kurt McConkie and the social worker that talked about the abuse helpline. And I thought that the stuff that they were talking about was really interesting. And yet at the same time, we don't see a lot of that being discussed in a lot of these faithful Latter-day Saint circles, because a lot of the attention has been drawn to, hey, who is on our side and who's not. And yes, there are serious consequences to that sort of thing. Is this going to affect like how seriously people take Latter-day Saint apologetics? Is this the kind of thing that's going to affect people's testimonies, even if nobody's intending to cause harm to the said testimonies?
Right.
I think that it's easy to be careless in these kinds of platforms, and my hope is that in the future we'll be able to elevate the discourse a little bit, make sure that we're understanding what other people are trying to communicate, not necessarily listening to what they say, because we all mess up in how we speak every now and again.
Yes.
And it's difficult, especially in these public settings, to not trip over your words. I speak from experience. There's that. But like I said before, I'm the kind of person that is willing to kind of let that go. I want to be able to take him at his word when he says he supports the brethren. And knowing that he was counseled by the brethren on this issue is comforting to me. It was comforting to Ben, and I hope it's comforting to the audience as well.
I think we just have to be builders. There is a time and a place for deconstructing things that are wrong, but I think our overall trajectory has to be towards building something. It can't just be about going around and wrecking whatever we can because it has mistakes, because that affects people. I mean, as a writer, that's something I've had to learn to overcome is the being paralyzed by all of the criticism that I know I can invoke from saying anything wrong. The truth is, nobody can say everything that they believe, in one go, and it to misunderstand people, especially if we have like trained our brains over and over to look for the flaws in what people say. And I think Twitter, more than any other platform, really does this. It really incentivizes people looking for the one thing that they can tear down in what someone else has said. That creates a really weird, not healthy, mental exercise for understanding the world. So I just try, like, in my social media experience, when I'm writing, when I'm talking, I know it's not going to be perfect, but I am trying to build something good, something that will edify and help other people.
Amazing. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And then I want to circle back to Tarik and about philosophy and should we all just become Aristotelians and have our systems and then approach FAIR that way? What do you think, man? You're on mute.
Where are my manners? I'm sorry. No, I think FAIR does other things besides philosophy that are part of apologetics. History and cultural issues and other things. There are other parts of apologetics besides philosophy and theology. If what you're asking is should Latter-day Saints do like systematic theology, is that what you're asking? Like the way I think it's something about like the way the Catholic Church does, because the Catholic Church certainly does systematic theology.
I was speaking to Don Bradley when he was starting to investigate like church history, and the way that he described his experience, he said, well, it's sort of like a do-it-yourself theology. And some people think there are pros and cons to that, but some people say maybe it's an institutional issue. Yeah. Some people say that it's an institutional issue just because we don't have an official theology, and our apologetics people aren't out to build one. I mean, some people have gotten very close to systematizing something. Like the most systematic thing that comes to mind is Blake Ostler's work, right? But it's certainly not upheld by the church as the standard for Mormon belief. It's just his project. But to address sort of like this misinterpretation, misframing, more education is probably needed. Does that require more philosophy at church? Does it require structural changes? I don't know. I don't know how CES will address that, but it certainly seems to be the case that well, I wanted to hear your take. What can we do to help people be better thinkers in the church?
Well, certainly philosophy and theology are helpful in becoming a better thinker. Certainly philosophy is its love of wisdom, and a big part of it is clarity of thinking, seeing what the premises of your arguments are, the implications and things like that. But that requires training. That's not something you should just do on your own. Philosophy is just as technical as biology, and I say that because I study both, and you can't just do it on your own. Now you can start to do on your own once you learn a lot of basics, but you got to learn those things and get really grounded in those first. It is certainly different for Latter-day Saints to do like a systematic theology the way that the Catholic Church does, in part because you believe in open canon and open revelation. So systematizing things typically means like, okay, we've got all the information, now we have to put it all together. If you're already saying we don't have enough and there's still more coming, it'll be harder to do. That said, though, I think it's worthwhile for Latter-day Saints to do theology, especially because if you want to talk to like another faith, about what you believe versus the other faith, you probably need to know like clearly what your faith thinks about that issue. And sometimes it's really hard, I think, for Latter. And this is a good thing about Twitter that I've really noticed is I think it's hard for Latter-day Saints to interact sometimes with other Christian groups because they don't have like a clear, this is what our take is. It's like certain things are amenable to very different type and sometimes contradictory type of takes. So for that reason alone, I think theology and philosophy are worth doing just so you can clarify what the position is. I'm sure that other people will disagree with that, but that's where I would want to start.
Awesome. Maegan, I know you have to run. Thank you so much for being on here. We really appreciate you taking the time. We really value your thoughts. Thank you so much. Tarik, thank you for your thoughts as well. I agree. It's hard to be your own like monk in a cave and
I can
and
stay on a little longer to finish this off if you want, but
sure.
I don't know. I don't know if you need to run or not, but
you got kids
in the next 5 minutes, but I can stick around for just a little bit.
Totally, yeah, and I think we're wrapping up anyway, naturally, but I think it is hard to for sure think in a vacuum. I mean, autodidacts, some of them are impressive, but you fall into the trap of confirmation bias, self-deception, but then even if you do have peers with you, one of the things that was sort of interesting when we kind of went to a home church model prior to COVID is some people were worried. It's like, are we going to have another like 1980s? What was that Hulu show about those guys that started their own schismatic group? And schismatic groups have emerged post-COVID, where people aren't challenging their belief systems. They're not assessing whether or not their train of thoughts are valid. It can be very easy to sort of just like parrot what everyone else is saying because maybe it wins you points or maybe it confirms a certain bias. And maybe that means that we have to be patient with other people. And I mean, science, philosophy doesn't happen with an individual. It takes a community of people to really pull it off. Same with, I mean, and that aligns with our church doctrine. We don't just approve things because the president of the church thinks it's cool. He has to pass it through common consent. It's a social process. And so I think maybe we need more of that. We need more social interactions with people who might have unorthodox thoughts, let's say. Any last words before we wrap up here?
Well, like here's a good example of where I think philosophy is going to be useful. When you talk about like take the King Follett sermon, does that mean that there's an infinite number of gods, or does it mean that the Father, like the Son, became incarnate, but has always been God? The Book of Mormon seems to indicate that Jesus has always been God, so that leans like some evidence to that kind of Ostler style interpretation. But there are other ways of looking at that and things like that. But that's a philosophical thing. There are a lot of assumptions you have to make there. Another one would be with like heavenly parents. Do you need, for example, if we're all eternal beings and things like that, which some people would say that's what's meant by intelligence, is that we're all uncreated, self-existent, things like that. Well, then in the recent Gospel Topics essay where it says like we believe we're literally parents of our Father, Heavenly Father and Heavenly Mother, like that actually wouldn't make sense. If you're eternal, you wouldn't have any parents. You would just be a self-existing being. So that would actually have to be more metaphorical, which is similar to the way other Christians would think of, they don't think God literally birthed them that way or something like that. But these are, again, theological, philosophical things. So and outside of a revelation that clears it all up, and I doesn't seem to be the pattern that revelation clears everything up. It gives you some background, but you have to fill in the details. So yeah, those are big areas I think that are ripe for plucking. They're issues I, of course, think about a lot myself. But
Hmm.
yeah, I don't know. Maybe Zach will disabuse me. Maybe I'm completely off base there.
Well, it's interesting you talk about like the idea of like an infinite regression, for example. I had read portions of Michael Huemer's Understanding Knowledge, which you recommended to me actually, and like of course he goes over different like models of how we can like, ground our knowledge. Infinitism, of course, being one of them. Now, most philosophers don't like that. They prefer foundationalism. I like foundationalism better, admittedly.
I do not.
You don't?
I do not know.
I
I'm
see.
I'm an empiricist. Of course, I'm not a foundationalist.
Got it.
No.
Well, that aside, though, that doesn't necessarily change the fact that philosophy can provide tools that we can use to solve problems again. And that's the whole premise of critical thinking. We use those tools to solve problems that we see in the modern day world, to improve our relationships and that sort of thing. And I liked Maegan's comments that she made about being builders, where we are supposed to, instead of being the kinds of people to tear things down, it is more advantageous to us as members of the church to help each other out and to use these tools to solve the problems that are actively affecting people on the ground, and also being able to uphold truth wherever it can be found. And I appreciate what FAIR does. And I was saddened to hear that there was as much kind of pushback against what FAIR was trying to do and what Aaron Schring was saying. I'm glad we got to talk about that a little bit. Like I said, I got to bounce. But I will say thank you for letting me hang out with you guys and chat about this.
Yeah, man. Thanks for being on. We appreciate your time.
Thanks for reading the book I actually recommended you. It's nice to know that people actually bring those things up, pick those things up.
I just want to leave on one more comment, and then we'll end. I'll be brief, but I keep coming back to sort of Maegan's talk and Maegan's comments today, and I think about priesthood and kind of like the function it serves. I think one of the things it does is, and this is sort of more psychological, I think, is it actually does protect us from a type of self-deception or where our ideas kind of run amok, right? Like when I think about church history and competing revelations and competing theologies, Joseph Smith uses his priesthood authority to say, wait a second, we can't all be revealing everything all at once. We would have chaos. There has to be a structure. And when there are schismatic groups or disagreements that are internal, not all of those are valid. Some of them are, but the way that we sort of deal with them is they go up the priesthood line of authority, and not only that, but the priesthood sort of has an ethic, right? It says, reprove with sharpness when moved upon by the Spirit, and then show an increase of love, lest your brother think he is your enemy, right? And so there's a way to disagree, and there's a way to wrestle with ideas that maybe we don't agree with, and I would argue those are the ways in which people who sort of like live life abundantly and they're full of light, that's how they deal with things. They're full of patience and long suffering and energy and compassion and light. And they, again, if they have to say that an idea is wrong or that someone is in the wrong, they do so, but then they love them afterwards. And that takes so much energy to do that, and so much effort and concerted, I would say even practice to reprove lovingly in a way that people will be more likely to take that correction. So I think that's a tall order for all of us involved. I hope in the future we can disagree better, which is what that was sort of the point of your talk at FAIR, Zach, and of course philosophy allows us to do that in a very analytical and sharp manner. We don't want to say nonsense. We want to say something that has a sense, so that we can evaluate it. But yeah, thank you guys so much, and thanks everyone on the live streams for participating. Please share this with friends and family if you enjoyed it. If you disagreed with us, please let us know online. We'll make a response. Everyone, have a great night. Thank you so much.